You've probably heard that despite being only 2% of total body mass, the brain takes up a monstrous 20% of our total energy. But that's old news. I bet you haven't thought as much about the fact that when energy demand is high, so is metabolic stress and waste. Stress and waste that, when not regulated properly, could be the X factor in determining your daily mood, feel, and cognition. Ultimately placing one tiny organelle at the center of good vibes as we know it. Or, for that matter, bad ones. Yo, what is up? Welcome back to another week of How to Health. My name is Kevin. I run liftinbalance.com, where we take aim at all things health and longevity and do it in an odd, weird, interesting, and highly sarcastic way. Today, we are making our way into one of the most power-hungry cells we humans have, and talking about how a disruption to their operations could be catastrophic to our inner Tony Robbins, making us feel more tired, lethargic, depressed, anxious, cognitively impaired, and leaving us in a chronic state of being blue. And not the dabba-dee-dabba-da blue. Actually, quite the opposite of that mood-boosting jam. This disruption, which we will be highlighting today, originates at one of the most ancient and mission-critical pieces of cellular machinery that we have. The energy-producing organelles which fill up neurons by the thousands. The machinery which, as we'll explore today, may be at the root of the growing mental health crisis which is affecting more and more intelligent walking apes each and every day. But equally important, highlighting strategies to get them vibing and thriving once again. If you haven't already guessed, these cellular longevity modulators are our mitochondria, a once single-celled organism which established a symbiotic relationship with another single-celled organism billions of years ago, setting the stage for complex life as we know it, allowing multicellular life to flourish, and eventually make odd, weird, highly sarcastic health and longevity videos on an interconnected electrical grid we coined the internet, with a few steps in between. Turns out these ancient organelles can make or break us as it pertains to our health, as we've discussed in prior videos, which will be linked below, and as we'll reiterate today. Their function, efficiency, and plasticity not only determine how much energy our cells have, but also how many damaging metabolic waste products are leaked into the cell, something which at its most benign will damage the individual mitochondria, and at its worst will cause a siege of inflammatory damage, which leads to the dysfunction and death of the entire cell. And in the case of neurons, which tend to be lifers, meaning cells that we are born with and do not renew or regenerate very often, that's not a very good scenario. In fact, it is one that is hypothesized to be a major player in the development of mental health disorders. Let's double click on that and take a deeper look. In 2019, the Global Burden of Disease, Injuries, and Risk Factors study showed that depressive and anxiety disorders were a top 10 disease burden, disabling adolescents and adults. And as the mental health crisis has gradually gotten more scientific attention, an association has been identified between a few metabolic happenings and the conditions so commonly linked with mental disorders. What are these happenings, you ask? Well, things like insufficient energy production, excess free radical leak, and chronic inflammation. All situations which impair our cells from celling properly, and interestingly, all being biologically connected to those ancient mitochondria. Now, this isn't to say that these are the only factors involved in the diseases of mental illness, and that mitochondria are the sole modulators, because the reality is, this stuff is really complex, and the actual direct causes of each of these conditions is still very much rooted in evolving science and speculation. A likely mix of genetic and metabolic factors which are persuaded by one's environment, making the diagnosis of drivers an ongoing puzzle. That being said, what we do know is growing evidence suggests that people with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and major depressive disorders have lower levels of mitochondria function in their brain, along with higher levels of oxidative stress or a unbalance of reactive metabolic byproducts which can damage the mitochondria further. And although the exact mechanisms in which mitochondria dysfunction contributes to mental health disorders is still far from being fully understood, it's thought that it may and probably does lead to changes in brain function. Changes which are hypothesized to contribute to the development of mood disorders, psychosis, depression, and anxiety. What are these changes, you ask? Here are some of the potential byproducts of this dysfunction at play. First, reduced energy production. As dysfunction of these critical energy producing powerhouses in one of the most energy demanding cells in the body, a neuron, does not set the stage very nicely for cognitive prowess. In fact, it does the opposite. If mitochondria are not functioning properly, they may not be able to produce enough ATP, which is the energy substrate we use for pretty much all cellular function. This can lead to fatigue, cognitive impairment, and many other symptoms. Next, we have impaired synaptic plasticity. And you may be asking, what the hell is that? Synapses are the connections between neurons, and they're essential for passing along signals and thus life as we know it. If mitochondria are not functioning properly, they may not be able to provide enough energy for synapses to function properly, leading to impaired neuronal and physiological function as a byproduct. Moving on, we now touch on some detractors, not to be confused with dementors, which are those badass energy-sucking ghosts in Harry Potter. Although ironically, they kind of do the same thing. First, there's increased oxidative stress. This is essentially an unbalance of free radicals compared to antioxidant defenses in favor of the free radicals. And here's why this matters. Mitochondria produce these unstable molecules, free radicals, as a byproduct of energy metabolism. Think of this as a biological cost of doing business. Problem is, too many, especially at the wrong time, can not only damage the mitochondria, but take out the whole cell. And this has been hypothesized to contribute to the development of neurodegenerative diseases and their often precursors, cognitive impairment, and mood disorders. Lastly, we have longevity liability numero uno, inflammation, specifically the chronic type. This is the chronic overactivity of our immune systems to the point where it becomes damaging to our cells and tissues in the vicinity. And guess what? Mitochondria play a key role in regulating inflammation, specifically by modulating free radical leak. When they're functioning properly, leak is low. However, as you could probably guess, when they're dysfunctional, leak is high. And this high leak can lead to increased inflammation, which, suspiciously, has been associated with almost every mental health disorder on the market. Certainly makes you think. That is, if your mitochondria are letting you. All this leads to a recent 2023 study published in the journal Nature, which performed a mitochondrial-wide association and interaction analysis on data from over 400,000 participants from the UK Biobank, investigating the interaction effects of mitochondrial DNA and the inflammatory marker C-reactive protein on the risks of anxiety and depression, finding 7 significant interactions for anxiety and 17 significant interactions for depression, having authors conclude that there is an interaction role of mitochondria function and inflammatory cytokines in the prevalence of psychiatric disorders. However, as we know, association does not mean causation. So we must continue to push forward as the curious species that we are and persist to seek more knowledge, because so much is still unknown. However, in the meantime, as we're out there getting our Jimmy Neutron on, it's probably a good idea to hedge our bets and do some things that put our mitochondria in a position to vibe efficiently. So let's talk about them. And what better place to start than with the end in mind? Or asking ourselves, what do we ultimately want our cellular and metabolic state to look like? Everyone loves a good thought experiment. First, we definitely want to keep our mitochondria as functional and efficient as possible for as long as possible. Because remember, they're right there along with the nucleus as the most critical infrastructure that we have. And as we've seen in this video here, when they become dysfunctional, the cell itself becomes dysfunctional. And when enough cells become dysfunctional, you, my friend, are a dysfunctional, intelligent walking ape. Yeah, likely being less intelligent than you once were because of it. Next, we also want to keep inflammation in check, meaning acute and specific in its response. Because even though it is absolutely critical for healthy function, when it's chronically overactive, it begins to wreak havoc and destruction within the cell and surrounding tissue. Exactly why we call low-dose chronic inflammation longevity liability numero uno around these parts. So how do we accomplish these momentously microscopic goals? Well, good news is we come equipped with all of the biological tools we need to do it, as we are a self-healing, constantly renewing masterpiece of biological wonder. And just so you don't get too full of yourself, so is a fly. That being said, as chronological time on this beautiful floating rock accrues, and more importantly environmental stressors from life and lifestyle accrue, things get rusty. Power stations get leaky and less efficient. And as we know, when there's an energy crisis, the whole city suffers. And who do you think suffers the earliest and hardest? Likely the cells with the most pressing energy demands, like neurons. So, the question becomes, how do we drive efficient cellular operations for longer? And it turns out, despite all of our modern pharmaceutical and technological advancements, the most powerful thing that we can do to promote the health and function of our longevity machinery is through plain old, boring lifestyle habits, or daily routines and rituals which elicit a beneficial cellular response. A response which promotes the health of mitochondria, genome stability, and controls inflammation. Consistent exercise happens to do all of these, as we've discussed ad nauseum throughout dozens of videos on this channel. Boosting mitochondria function, recycling weak, leaky, damaged ones via a process called mitophagy, and promoting the synthesis of new healthy ones via a process called mitochondria biogenesis. Increasing the overall capacity of strong, non-leaky mitochondria, and thus minimizing the overall risk of mitochondria leak. It has also been shown to reduce inflammation by eliciting a powerful anti-inflammatory response to a bout of badonkadonking. 120 minutes a week of moderate to vigorous exercise at 60 to 80% max heart rate is a great goal to strive for. And wouldn't you know it, what you eat matters too. Real whole foods filled with vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytonutrients, healthy fats, fiber, and protein fuel, lubricate, and repair our cellular machinery in ways no pharmaceutical can compare to. It provides the raw material for energy production, the building blocks for the creation of proteins, peptides, and neurotransmitters, facilitates the growth and maintenance of healthy muscle, which are some of the most mitochondria-dense cells we have, while reducing the damage and leak of free radicals along the way. These foods also reduce inflammation directly through antioxidant promoting pathways and indirectly by modulating things such as the microbiome and inflammatory visceral fat. So keep this video in mind next time you're deciding what to eat. And as we know, with eating comes strategically not eating, as practices such as daily time-restricted feeding and intermittent fasting have been shown to upregulate beneficial rest, rejuvenation, and repair pathways. But you already know that, because we have been talking about it for years all throughout the Fasting 101 playlist. It ramps up cellular and mitochondrial cleanup pathways such as autophagy and mitophagy, ridding away the insults before they proliferate. It's also been shown to re-energize stem cells, or non-specific cells which differentiate into tissue based on the body's needs, reduces inflammation levels, partly by helping modulate free radical leak, and boosts mitochondria plasticity and integrity. Pretty good deal, if you ask me. Speaking of integrity, all of our cellular and metabolic integrity goes out the window when we are chronically sleep deprived, as sleep deprivation has been shown to alter our mitochondria's bioenergetic capacity, decreasing respiration efficiency and increasing the expression of genes involved in the oxidative stress response. Combining that with the fact that it is a oh-so-critical time for detoxification and immune strengthening makes anything other than good circadian-aligned sleep with an 8-hour sleep opportunity a cellular and metabolic risk not worth taking. Other key modulators of your internal machinery include managing stress, as low-dose chronic stress is right up there with chronic inflammation in its nefarious effects, exposure to pollutants and toxins in the environment and everyday products, spending more time in nature and connecting electrically with the earth, aka grounding, incorporating more good stressors such as heat and cold exposure, and even breathing right. Here's a hint: use your nose. At this point, you may be wondering, how do I know if any of this is even working? I mean, we're talking the cellular machinery for billions of cells. The simplest answer I can give you is, you feel it. When you focus on the habits which promote your cellular health and efficiency, you think better, feel better, move better, and function better in the short term and the long, likely improving any condition you're currently battling, including any one in your head. And although your mitochondria function is not the only factor at play, it's probably the most ancient one. So it's a great place to start, knowing that the emotional and psychological work still needs to be done. But I'll tell you this, when you commit to taking back control of your most valuable asset and structure your daily habits in a long-term sustainable way, you exile yourself from being another mental health statistic and begin to feel how you were always capable of feeling, the default human state on a consistent basis. Good. Or, as I like to say, effing awesome. Something you deserve. But just like a consistent flow of interesting ideas or positive thoughts, it doesn't just happen. You need to cultivate the environment to make it happen. And with that, one more question remains. Are you gonna get your neural cultivation on? Your neurons are waiting, and so are those good vibes.